Welcome to the Solution Finders. Today I'm here with Gabriel Dawe, who is an installation artist. He works with sewing thread, and his installations are available are in museums all around the world. And they're like beautiful rainbows. And I'm so happy to have you here today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And yeah, can you talk about how you started to do these installations? How where the idea is coming from?
Or it started as a big experiment. I was in grad school at the time, and um, I was working with textiles. I was working with embroidery and um, with clothing, like taking apart clothing and putting like straight pins on it, and um, because I was working in some ways related to textiles and fashion. Not that I was making fashion, but working with clothing. I was invited to participate in a group show that was pairing textile artists with architects, and the whole aim of the show was to explore how fashion and architecture um, are related to each other. So, in doing my research for that show, is when I started to think, well, what would happen if I use my source material, which is thread, um, and I use it in the scale of architecture? And so I had a studio in my university, and I was like, okay, I have this big wall. What would happen if I just cover this whole wall in sewing thread? And that's what sort of started the installations. And it was a very exciting moment for me because it just felt that I was onto something and that it had a lot of possibilities. And it was sort of taking this medium I was using in in small scale and just really exploded it into space, like just make it really big. Um, and I felt that it was just taking that message that I was working with uh, to another level of sorts. Because I started doing embroidery um, a few years before going to grad school, because when I used to be a graphic designer, and when I had this big burnout and I just decided to quit my job and become an artist, um, I, I was trying to like looking to what was it that I wanted to do. Like I had this recollection of being a very frustrated 8-year-old who wanted to embroider. And I wasn't allowed because I was a boy. I grew up in Mexico City, so it's like a very macho culture. And it was a complete no-no for me, and it was like very frustrating. And that led me, like years later, as an adult, I was like, okay, well, I'm a grown man. I can choose what to do and what not to do. So I decided to learn to teach myself how to embroider. And um, the biggest frustration with that medium, though, is that it was so painstakingly slow, and it was also small. Like I couldn't get um, things like bigger, and um, so this exhibition of exploring how fashion and architecture relate to each other was really this giant gift that allowed me to really make something really big and of impact.
Yeah, that's beautiful and interesting. I had something similar in my life in the sense that like my family told me I wanted to do like art school from like about 14 years old. But then I was said, oh, you don't find a job with that. So I went to science high school and then computer science after that. And in computer science, I was pushing to do, so my favorite exam and my final thesis was for graphic design, graphic 3D graphics. And then
Mm.
after that, I didn't find a job in computer science. So I went to a comics and animation course. And like my career kind of started in animation after that. And then
Yeah.
art. So kind of pushing, even though like kind of society around goes one way and then say, no, actually, I want to do something else. Eh, and it's very nice that like you had that curiosity towards embroidery and then you went back to it and and then it transmuted with these very big artworks installations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating how when as a child, kind of like adults squash your dreams. Um, yeah, it's as and then, like when you grow up and you're able to go back to that childhood desires, sometimes there's no suppressing them. Well, and actually, in a sense, I feel that if you continue to suppress them, it just works to your detriment of your psyche and your well-being. So I think if everybody would go back to those childhood dreams, I think the world would be so much better. We would all be so much happier. Um, and yeah, we would be in a different state of the world. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, it's really but like you were saying, you stopped that job because we were in burnout, and then
Yeah.
you say okay, but kind of looking for something that may make you feel better, and you went back to
Yeah. I mean, I was really lucky in the sense that even though I wasn't allowed to embroider, but I was always allowed to be very creative. So when I went to university in Mexico, I was between going into art and graphic design, but at the time I was really into posters and typography and magazines. Like this is in the 90s, so it's kind of like the heyday of magazine design. Like at the time, we had there was this magazine very influential um, called Ray Gone, which was like a music magazine, and I mean, it was phenomenal. It was very experimental, and it was just. I think that the designer was David Carson, and he was like an idol of mine. Like he was this very creative and very experimental designer, and so I studied graphic design, and I absolutely loved it. Like I thought it was my dream career. Um, and later, when I moved to Montreal, I was working in this boutique studio. It was very small. I was the first employee of these two partners, and I, I had my dream job. Um, and unfortunately, what happened is that um, our computers were robbed, and like I just ended up having to repeat a lot of work and we didn't have a backup. We didn't know what that was. Um, And so we lost a lot of work, and it just ended up being such a grueling time that just had this massive breakdown. Not breakdown, burnout. I mean, it was almost a breakdown, but I was like, okay, I had to quit. Like one day I went to see my boss, and I was like, they had just given me a new project, and I was like, listen, man, I don't have it in me. I can't. I have to quit. And he was like, well, like when? I was like right now. I just can't. And I mean, he was really understanding, and so I quit. I became an artist, and um, I had to work in retail for a while. Um, After a couple of years, 2 or 3 years after, I went back to the same company um, to work there. Because when I quit, I almost felt like a failure. So I feel I had to go back to sort of reclaim my own self-worth in a sense. So I was able to go back and work there for a few more years, and just sort of like reclaim that, okay, I'm actually a good designer, and it was not like it was just the circumstances that led me to have the burnout, not because I was a bad designer. And then after a few years of that is when I decided to go to grad school and to do my MFA.
And so, and then you moved to USA?
Yeah, I came to the US to study, to do my MFA. Plexus number one was that first experiment I did in the studio. So it was towards like the second half of my degrees when I started doing the installations. Because like my university here in Dallas had this very unique residency program for students, and we had studios and exhibition space, and the architect show is happening in that gallery, and I had the piece in my studio, and that's it, it's a place that was really well known in the Dallas community, so people came to see that. People came to my studio, and so a gallery gave me a show, and then these two nonprofit spaces gave me also shows in the same year. So I ended up having like these four pieces in the span of like 1 year, which is like it was really lucky. And this is the early beginnings of social media. So in terms of so there was no, I think Instagram was at the very beginning. I didn't have an Instagram at the time. But I did send my photos to uh, like a website. I think it was called Moco Loco. I don't know if it still exists, to be honest. I haven't seen it in a long time. Um, but they posted, it was one of those blogs that posted constantly about art and design. And so my website went just like bananas. It's just like in terms of hits. And I mean, by today's standards, it's not like something you could consider viral, but for me, it just went like off the charts. And so that started giving me more shows, and it opened up a lot of possibilities and opportunities. Because the work site specific, every new invitation was this opportunity to explore what I could do. How could I do something new every time? That's how the work has been evolving through the years.
How did you do it? Like, did you go and visit the space, and then did you take sketches, or
It-
how's the process?
yeah, the process depends. Ideally, I would do a site visit to see the space, and then I do a sketch. and I do a proposal, and then um, usually now like the museum or the gallery, they do the prep work, like the anchoring, where I'm going to anchor the hooks, and and then I arrive to do the work, the actual the thread. Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, I would do that myself. I would prepare the like boards, wood with hooks, and then eventually I was able to be in spaces where they had the staff to be able to support me in doing all that prep work. And so usually now, like all the prep work is done in advance, and then I just arrive and do the thread.
And did you have to do lots of research to like to find the right threads, the right like tools, and or
A little bit. At the beginning, like when I had the idea, I was like, I just went to the fabric store and just bought the thread that they had in the biggest spools. And luckily enough, they had it in a lot of colors. When I first started that first piece in my studio, um, in my mind, it was just going to be like yellow and orange. But then I started to run out of colors faster than I expected. So it started to get to the orange and then red. And then so it didn't quite end up being a full spectrum, but very close. Um, and then the second one I did again, it started in orange and yellow, but then it ended up in green and blue. So it didn't have a full spectrum either. And I was really scared at the beginning of doing a full spectrum, like a rainbow, because it just, I don't know, I was afraid it was going to be like maybe too childish or too fluffy in a sense. And um, but for the third one, I was like, okay, just screw this. I'm just going to do a full spectrum because I think that feels right. Um, and so Plexus number three is the first piece where I decided to do like on purpose do the full spectrum, because also I was noticing like the first two pieces I noticed like it just looks like light in a sense, like when you see them from afar. And I was like, okay, let's reinforce that idea of light. Um and then like I've taken liberties throughout the years with light, or the idea of the full spectrum. And then I started after a few years, I started finding a way of disrupting it, disrupting the gradient of the full spectrum, but in a way that would still be harmonious. And that's like, if you see, I think the piece I did at the Toledo Museum of Art, I think was the first piece, um, and I think it's Plexus number 35. It's the first piece that has the breakout of the spectrum or the gradient, and you see these bands on the piece, or stripes. And now, like, what I'm starting to move into is completely different, because I went to the Arctic in 2023, and it it really changed my world. It just um, completely changed my way of thinking about my work, about color. When I first arrived, I was in a residency on board of a ship. And so when I first arrived, it was a misty, cloudy day. It's the end of winter, the beginning of the polar day. So it's the beginning of midnight sun. But it was misty and very snowy, like a lot of snow and ice. So, you know, from my world being a lot about color, um, and I arrive at this landscape that's just at first impression just black and white. It's just completely transformative in my mind. Like it just really shattered my worldview. And um, yeah, so now I'm starting to make installations that well, I've only done one, but that it's just working with the idea of ice. It's the same material, same uh, concept as or same process as the Plexus installations, but now instead of fragmented light, it's I'm trying to shift into depicting ice and glaciers, icebergs, and so it's opening a complete new avenue of exploration. And like the installations have been about the idea of light and being inspired by fragmented light, and now it's eyes, but it's still light because it's about how light interacts with ice, which is completely amazing. When you see an iceberg in person, it just if the sun is hitting it, and it's just very hard to explain. It's just such an incredible experience to be able to see that in person.
Is a little bit it's related to the places where you lived a little bit, like the change, all the places you visited in the end, like the more the spectrum, like with the maybe sunny,
Yeah,
warm places, and now the ice.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, and it's wild because I lived in Montreal for 7 years, and for me, winters were always really hard. Um, and it was just very challenging, and I was so happy when I didn't have to live through such a long winter. Um, and what happened in the Arctic is like the landscape is just so arrestingly beautiful that you don't care that you're freezing your ass off. It's just and you're also better equipped in terms of like wearing the right type of clothing and layers and undergarments and all that. But it really changed my relationship to cold weather. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily want to live there, but I would go back anytime. Yeah.
And you went to um, Norway as well, and uh, Iceland.
Yeah.
Did you go last year as well?
Yeah. Last year I had another residency in Svalbard. It was an alumni expedition of the previous residency I had done. So it was a bigger boat. And so I went back to Svalbard. I also went to the north of Norway, still above the Arctic Circle, in this little residency, which is amazing. I recommend it to anyone who wants to go. It's called, oh gosh, I'm gonna blank out on the name, but it's the island is called Arnoya. I think it's called the Light and Space Residency. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm just blotching this out. But it was just this amazing experience. Just being, it's a small residency. We were 5 artists, um, and the couple who runs this place, they're amazing. And we went on hikings, and it was just so beautiful. I went later in the summer, so it, it's it was towards the end of the midnight sun. Still, the light at night is just spectacular to me. It's one of the most incredible things about being in the Arctic in the summer is that it's just um, the light at night is just there's something very powerful about it. And I know some people go and it just very disorienting. I didn't find it disorienting at all. To me, it was just like so captivating.
How was it for you for your sleep cycle? Was it weird or
Not for me. I didn't get affected at all. Even like I would just wear a night like a mask to sleep, and I have no problem sleeping, luckily. So yeah, I just love the light at night during midnight sun, um, especially during the beginning and the end of the polar day, because I've never been there in the middle where the sun doesn't come down, but in terms of, it doesn't come lower. When I've been there was at the beginning and at the end, um, and so the sun lowers down, and it just I don't know how to explain it. It's just so beautiful because it's soft light, but still broad daylight, but it's softer. It's I don't know how to explain it. Um, yeah, and now I just announced that I got a fellowship with the National Science Foundation and a program called Polar STEAM, and I'm going to go to Antarctica in December of this year. So I'm going to experience the other side of the world. Um, and I'm going to be collaborating with researchers doing research on zooplankton and how climate change is affecting how the krill, which is this kind of like little shrimp-looking critters, that is the base food of basically is the staple food of penguins, whales, and seals. And um, so that's very exciting.
and is this something like
Um,
you looked for or did they approach you? Did you approach them? Um,
I applied.
you
I
applied for
applied. Yeah, I applied, and it was like a really long process and interviews, and yeah, yeah. And for a while, I couldn't say we got it, and then I finally they just announced it, so now I can tell, I can share.
nice, very nice, and
Yeah,
yeah, science, art and science together.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah. I mean, I think it's so exciting to be able to go with a team that's doing like important research in terms of climate change and how that is affecting um, and they seem so such remote areas that they're so off of the mind in a sense, like we think that they don't affect us, but like the changes that happen there affect us like in big ways that we're still finding out how. And um, but because the melting of the ice is just affecting things like sea currents, air currents, and it's part of the reason why the we have more severe weather and storms, and it's just really it's just it's very it's affecting us in very big ways.
And I seen that you do like with Plexus, you have the installation for a certain time, and then where you take it down, it goes into a box.
Yeah. So when the exhibitions are temporary, the I cannot reuse the thread. So and in a sense, like when they come down, it's just so it's so beautiful in its own way. Like it just becomes sort of the opposite of what the installations were. So installations are very geometric and ethereal and subtle and nuanced, and then they come down and they're like very dense. Um, the color is brighter because it's more of it together, and it's organic. And it just they become the opposite. So to me, they become a reflection on um, life and death, and to me, it's sort of important to in a way celebrate the afterlife of what the installation was, and with these new pieces, and I call them relics, inspired by the influence of Catholicism in my upbringing. Um, and yeah, actually, I have one here right now.
They were really nice.
I don't know if I can. Oh gosh, it's a huge one actually.
Oh wow.
So yeah,
And
so
this is miles of thread.
yeah, yeah. I don't remember how many miles this particular piece was, but yeah, it's a lot of thread.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting how in the exhibition they are like I don't know the dimensions are very big. Could be something like well I know in meters like 15, 20 meters, something like that.
Yeah,
And then when you take it off, you can hold it all in your hand.
yeah,
It's
yeah. And this, I think this one was from. I mean, it was a piece that was like I don't know how much that is in meters. It was 40 feet, um, 40 feet span, which, yeah, not sure how much that is in meters, but
probably it's
it
20,
was pretty big.
I don't know, 20 meters,
Yeah.
let's say. Feet. Oh, I'm rubbish at this. Maybe yeah, 10, 15, maybe. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I think you sort of, if you divide roughly by three. So anyway,
13, 13, about 13.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I've been living in England for many years, but like I didn't learn the different
the
measurements.
imperial
And still,
system.
I don't understand that. Tell me meters. So I take the phone and try to Google
Yeah,
do the calculations. And do you, you exhibit the relics as well? You had it in exhibition.
yeah, yeah. And you, like you said, like I sometimes put them in a cube, sometimes they're framed, so they look more like a painting, and sometimes they're just sort of bundled into knots and just shown like that. So it changes.
How long does it take? Does it always take less time to take it off than to put it on
Yeah,
and do the installation?
yeah. It only takes like a 10% of the time that it took to put them up.
I seen you did a music video in which we can see all the process. We can see you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was, gosh, that was, I think that was in 2012. It's this music video. I don't even remember who the artist was. It's a French Canadian artist, Marie-Pierre Arthur, I think it's her name. And the song is called Fil de Soie, so just like silk thread in English. And um, yeah, that was a fun, a fun process. We for the music video, I mean, and the music video you can see sort of a little bit of the process of putting it up, and then we destroy it at the end of the so it was fun. It was fun to do.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. But it's good that they, yeah, you can see people reacting to it first and then touching it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then at the end, you the children.
Yeah, and then we glue down and the video finishes with all the thread in a little box in a cube in a glass box. So
It's nice to see all the process. It's like, yeah, from
yeah,
the Texas to the
yeah.
Relic. What about the reactions of people? Did you see, did you see like the visitors a lot? You were saying, I think there were kind of opposite reactions to the installations.
I think that's one of the most fun parts. Just seeing people react, and it's very, I think it's one of the most gratifying parts of the whole process, just because it's almost like seeing people's masks fall off, like, and then it just going to this very authentic space of like wonder and um sometimes literally seeing people's jaws drop, and it's fun, and it's just um being able to do something that brings people joy and just this sense of wonder. I think especially like in today's world so full of turmoil and horrors of war and um genocides and whatnot, it's just, to me, it's sort of important to be able to bring something that brings a sense of a little bit of hope and sense of joy to people.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's important as well. It's beautiful because really people when they visit art, they see art like yours, they the stress goes away and like there's really well-being,
Mm.
there's really this joy coming up and relief, and that's really
Yeah,
it's good for the body. It's good for the person. This stress.
yeah, it's good for the soul, and yeah, for sure.
And at the beginning, you were doing art a little bit more like did a paint series, and
Yeah,
was there an evolution a little bit like from kind of fear, pain,
yeah.
hope?
Well, I think, I mean, a lot of my work is really related to my personal process in terms of like just growing up as a person. Um, so when I was like before the pain series, I had the fear series, and um, I think for me, art, like the process of making art for me in many ways related to what I'm working on myself as a person. And um, the fear series to me was about, like facing my fears and like and just how if you don't face your fears, they're gonna crawl on you. And so it like all that series is pieces of shirts. Many of them were my own shirts. And it's just embroidered insects on them. And then from that sort of came the pain series, and the pain series came out of grad school again, and it was before the installations, but I was taking this particular class and we were sort of invited to translate our process into sculpture. And so that repetitive action of stitching for embroidery um, became like pushing pins into pieces of fabric and to symbolize like the ways in which we inflict pain on ourselves, sometimes just unnecessarily. And um, it's not like you're inflicting pain, like actual physical pain on yourself, but like just psychologically, how sometimes we tend to abuse ourselves. I mean, at least I do. And yeah, it's something that I've struggled throughout the years in terms of like being too hard on myself and not having enough compassion. And as I've grown older and wiser, um, I've been able to work on that and just be um, able to take care of myself in some ways. But I still sometimes find myself just being too hard on myself because, and like punishing myself because I didn't do X, whatever. But so yeah, to me, art has always been a way of of working through things, or working, or they come out um, of having worked either on therapy or on an ayahuasca ceremony or something. But they come out of that progress I've done on becoming a better person. I don't know if any of that made sense, but yeah. So even like the act of starting to embroider because um, of a childhood frustration is just like tending to my own inner child and like, okay, what do you want to do? Let's do what you want to do, and just foster and promote that within myself.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful because it gives permission to other people when they see your work and when they know the story as well. I guess there's the first reaction that can be more of their own, and then when they read the story as well, they can relate as well. Like I was relating earlier on with the going back to
Mm.
the childhood thing, like saying like I wanted to do something artistic before, but then there were obstacles, and then you go back and say, well, actually, let's go back to
Yeah,
what feels good.
yeah, yeah. Um, and I think it's two things. It's probably more than two things, but one is like, yeah, like going to that sort of childhood desires that were sort of like brushed off as childish or immature or or not proper, and then the other is just facing your own demons and just not let them be what drive you from behind in a sense, and just facing them and just working with your own shit. And um, yeah.
And uh, did you have like you were talking about ayahuasca ceremonies? Did you have like some kind of visions that then you wanted to make art about? So like something you
not
see or
not
you
really. For me, the ayahuasca ceremonies were a very powerful process in terms of facing early childhood trauma and just facing, like I said, like facing my own demons. And um, I, I mean, work did came out of that, but it's not something that I had a vision while in the ceremony. And I mean, what happened with that, I just felt that I found the piece of my puzzle that I had been looking for my whole life. And that, I mean, and that was the language I was using, like, oh, I found the piece of the puzzle. And very naively, I thought that that piece was going to be like, that was like, that's it. That was the piece I was missing, and now I'm good. Um, and a couple of years later, when I noticed that I was sort of falling into a bit of a depression, and I couldn't understand why. I was like, well, I mean, I found that piece. I should be okay. And that's, I had a few months before that, I had just come back from India, and I was, I mean, India was such an incredible and amazing experience, but to me, India just kind of like, I don't know what India did to me, but when I came back home, I just couldn't do anything. Um, it was it's such a powerful country, and like the mysticism in that in the temples, and it was just, I mean, it was so beautiful, but at the same time, it turned my brain into mush. I just couldn't function. So I took time off, and I was doing puzzles, like jigsaw puzzles, which I've always loved doing. And I kind of feel that for the first time, I just let myself enjoy the process of making a puzzle, because before that, I just felt always this sort of bit of guilt, because I felt I was wasting my time. And so I just let myself, I took 5 days or like a week or so to just do puzzles. And one of those puzzles had missing pieces. And it's just like, if you like doing puzzles, you know how frustrating that is. And so I just put it aside. And months later, when I'm noticing that I'm getting depressed and I'm just not understanding, and then I just had these I had this sort of like idea of putting gold leaf on the on that puzzle that had missing pieces. And it just gave me a lot of insight, like, oh, I just had this really profound realization, like, oh, like as long as I'm alive, I'm gonna have missing pieces. So uh, the missing series is what came out of that process of doing ayahuasca, and thinking that I had found the piece that I was missing, but then not at the moment not realizing that, well, I'm still gonna have missing pieces as long as I'm alive. And so I look on eBay for puzzles that have missing pieces, and um, so that's what the missing series is. And then, I mean, that process of buying all these puzzles, I started finding like famous works of art that have missing pieces as well. And then I was like, well, I don't feel I should put gold leaf on this. So I started leaving them um, just with the missing piece. And just to me, it's just like, it's sort of in a way the most conceptual work I've done. Um, it, it's called the Incomplete series, and it's you can say it's a bit of a commentary on like what does the canon of art is living out. That what they're showing us as the canons are might not be complete, and there might be things missing. And you know, just simply by erasing a lot of the women that have been
Mhm.
unrecognized, things like that. And then I had a show in 2022 um, that was sort of the culmination of all these that came out from the ayahuasca ceremonies, and it was and working with a lot of puzzles. Um, it was called Ode to Futility, and a lot of it is inspired by the Tower of Babel, and how the human, a lot of what we do as humans is just these acts of futility that are attempting to fill in the holes we feel inside, and it's just it's just a futile attempt of feeling, making ourselves feel better without actually um, instead of instead of working with deep within ourselves to feel those holes from within instead of trying to feel it from without.
Yeah, yeah, it's like yeah, that Tower of Babel is like just building a tower that goes to the sky. It's just like some kind of rule given from the
Right. So it's
I do this. I'm going to do this, but like I don't even know why, in a sense.
right. So I mean, because the aim was they wanted to reach heaven, right? But and to me, it's just sort of like the supreme act of futility because you're trying to build this massive structure to reach heaven, but no matter how high you build it, you're gonna still be earthbound. And but in a sense, the reason I called it Ode to Futility is because in a sense, what I'm celebrating is like, yeah, I mean, it's completely misguided thing that you're building, but the ingenuity um, of engineering and architecture that had to go into that to be able to build this massive structure. I feel that despite the futility of the goal, there's something to celebrate about the ingenuity of humanity. So yeah,
Yeah, it makes me think about the biggest buildings in the world that they have all these
yeah,
shops inside and they are like going up to the sky and there's so much people and things inside, but it's like a city. Uh, yeah, and we looked.
yeah. I mean, because
Uh,
it's like I feel that like all these massive buildings, they come out of this yearning of wanting to be the best or be the highest and be the tallest, and it's this sort of like I don't know, this again, I feel it's this desire to feel in something inside of us that it cannot be filled from something exterior. And but yet, I mean, some of those structures are amazing at the same time, right? Um, so I don't know if you, I don't know. I just feel that, and this is something that, like, working with my own trauma, just learning that, yeah, something horrible might have happened to me, but it's that, it's what happened from that. It's what happened to me from after that trauma that led me to search and it just led me to push through life into creating what I do. So yeah, it probably would have been better if nothing had happened, but if nothing happened, would I have done what I've done?
yeah, uh,
So I don't know.
It reminds me,
it might be like a chicken and the egg
yeah,
problem type of thing.
it reminds me of something. I think it was like a joke I read in a book. It was saying that in Italy um, there was like a century. It was horrible with wars, with everything, anything. And what came out of that? The Renaissance. And and
Yeah.
at the same time, it says in Switzerland there was 500 years of peace. And what did they have? The cuckoo clock. Until like that, it was saying that like there was all that drama, but there was so much
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful art coming out of it. So maybe
Yeah.
that's one of the goals of
Yeah.
the trauma.
Yeah. So yeah, and in a sense, like I feel that I guess because of my whole personal process, that's sort of the silver lining I can see to all the horrors that we're and the chaos that we're living through right now. It's just like, okay, out of this, there's something good that has to come out. That's at least that's my hope. It might be a little naive and I don't know, childish perhaps, but that is really I do I do see it, and I think seeing that silver lining is the only thing that keeps me sane.
Yeah, but I think it's um it, I had the impression it's popular as well. It's popular in a good way, like in the sense that when people see your art, then they share it, and then there's more people coming to see it. So so I think like the hopeful art is popular, and sometimes it's like more popular than art with other
Yeah,
messages. For example, it reminds me as well like Yayoi Kusama. She has this infinite rooms. They're always fully booked because they give wonder
yeah,
everywhere. I think it's the
yeah,
same
yeah,
concept in a sense.
yeah. And I think there's an importance in terms of um, it's important for there to be art that is protest art or political. Well, all art is political in a sense, but art that it talks directly to wrongdoings or protesting something, um, and it has its place in the world, and I think it's very important. Um, and but I do feel for me, I think it's really important to do something that brings in hope and appeals to the better parts of ourselves.
No, I agree with that, and it's a little bit the theme of this podcast, the solution finders, like to focus on finding the solution instead of focusing on the problem. And even when we uh, some kind of activism, like art with activism, let's say, saying, yeah, there's a problem here, but the more we look at the problem, the more we observe it, the more it becomes bigger in a
The
sense.
bigger you get, yeah.
And then you have the opposite of the kind of Tower of Babel. You have the one that goes down as well, the sky.
Yeah, and that speaks, I mean, and in the process of making the tower, like the negative space, I use jigsaw puzzles to make the towers, right? So all it's basically the same jigsaw puzzle, so it has the same die cut. So in the process of taking away the pieces to build the tower, I end up with a negative space that becomes this, I call them downward spirals. And um, they can look a little bit like those wells in India, like those giant water wells that have the stairs that go down to the water. And to me, it's the invitation to go inside, right? It's like to explore within ourselves. Like, I think the process of trying to build something to 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 fill in the whole inside of us. Um, like, I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. I think it's something that perhaps we have to do, but it's a simultaneous invitation to go within ourselves and go, just really get to know ourselves to the deepest, in the deepest possible sense.
And yeah, I know. It's a really philosophical.
Yeah.
It's good. It's good. And yeah, I love puzzles, and so those are kind of, you have round puzzles. Like, is it something like, how do you make them? Like, do you make them yourself? Or do you take puzzles that are already?
I've done both. Like, some of the towers are puzzles that I've bought throughout the years on eBay. Um, some are puzzles from the dollar store. Um, and some are puzzles that I had fabricated. Um, or some are existing puzzles that I was able to get from um, the manufacturer um, directly. Um, so and I mean, most of those puzzles I did myself. Like, I had, like, puzzles come all broken apart, so I had to put in like thousands of puzzles together. One of my towers, I was lucky enough that the manufacturer was able to ship them like together, so I didn't have to put them together, but I still had to, take the pieces off and glue them together to do the towers. And yeah.
And it was an interesting coincidence. I did like puzzles from when I was small, and I remember lending the puzzle to my neighbor, and she will give it back with a couple of missing pieces. I remember
Yeah.
she had a dog, so the dog ate one of the
Those are
pieces,
like them. Yeah.
and I was so angry because I said, you have to
Yes.
treat it well, my puzzle. It was
Yeah.
something like, yeah, something like a Snow White face was missing, something very bad. And then recently I did lots of work, like me too, find out my trauma, and lots of change
Yeah.
of subconscious beliefs and stuff like that. And I ended up in 2019 doing a big one. It was 1,000 pieces from Vincent van Gogh, and there was one missing piece. It was like all a black area with one missing piece, so you could see it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and at the time I had my children and I were small, and I was just, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm okay. I am going to leave it like this and put it on the frame. I put it up, and then
Yeah.
and I was surprised because I remember that episode of the dog eating the piece.
Yeah.
So so then I wrote something, and I said, oh my God, I'm so happy. Like I said, when you stop chasing something, it will show up effortlessly in your life, because then I looked for it, but I didn't care at all to find it, and I found it straight away.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I said I didn't care, and I found it. So it was
Yeah.
interesting. And yeah, I can really relate with your
Yeah.
your pieces.
Well, and that's sort of, I guess it can relate to the detachment that the Buddhists talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's good evolution
Yeah.
from caring to yeah, stop caring, and and then it shows up. But yeah, and it's the same you were saying that you stopped caring about ending the puzzle and uh, and they are beautiful, those golden unfinished
Yeah.
pieces. Very,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, and to me, those the missing series, like the gold leaf on the puzzles, it sort of symbolizes the perfection of the perfect, the perfection of the present moment. Um, I think a lot of Eastern philosophies talk about just like the full and total acceptance of what is, and and again, it's like sort of like the attachment that the Buddhists talk about. um, Attachment is what leads to suffering. So when you're not attached to something, it's the end of suffering. And of course, it's easier said than done, right? But it sort of to me like the gold on the puzzles just symbolizes that perfection and acceptance of the present moment.
nice. So gold really, when you use gold, is like really for perfection, for
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like one of the most precious metals, and it we talk about, the gold standard or um so it's just yeah, that symbol for of something precious, and we don't have anything but the now, like that's the moment we're living in, and that's all we have, and it's in surrendering into the perfection of the present moment that that the mystics tell us that is what will bring us the freedom.
yeah, yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think is this more? I think there are more recent golden path. It's similar.
Yeah. The Golden Path, again, they're on puzzles. And again, they came out of all these process of working with puzzles. Um, those pieces are inspired by the Chartres Cathedral in France, the labyrinth there. There's a famous labyrinth, and there's something mystical about labyrinths that I'm kind of intrigued by. And the labyrinth is this tool. It's like to do an active meditation. It's like a centering tool to be able to literally arrive at the center of something. Like if you have a question, it's something you can walk the labyrinth to try to gain some insight into that question. Um, and so yeah, so those pieces again, it's like gold leaf on sections of um of a puzzle to make this path, and they look like mazes, but they're not. Like there's a difference between a maze and a labyrinth. A maze can have dead ends, and you have to find your way out or your way in or whatever. Whereas the labyrinth is just a path from the outside to the center.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And so, what are your projects for the future?
Um, So I have an exhibition at a place called Villa Manin in Italy, in the northeast of Italy, in the province of what did
Yeah.
what
Udine.
did I tell you? Udine. And then I have some private commissions that we're working on, and cannot really talk uh, much about them yet. And then I have the fellowship in Antarctica with Polar Steam, and that's happening at the end of the year and early next year. Um, and yeah, I think that's all I can speak of right now.
You did some commissions of Plexus. How was it to work on private houses or corporate? Was it like different, interesting?
I mean, the process is very similar, whether it's temporary or not. When you're talking about pieces that are going to be permanent, there's other considerations. There's factors that you need to take into account in terms of like if people are going to be able to touch it, or because if it's a temporary museum exhibition, because it doesn't need to last a long time, it's okay to go to the floor and maybe just have a guard so people don't, go and destroy it. But if it's going to be a permanent piece, you have to consider um, people not being able to touch it. And I mean, I think that's basically the main difference.
Yeah.
Um, and you also have to, it's a bit of, perhaps it's a little bit of a different negotiation with the client because, um, because they're going to have to live with it, for a long time. So it's a bit different process in that sense, but otherwise it's the same. It's the same.
Good. Oh, thank you very much for this conversation. And
Yeah, thank you for having me.
yeah, I will have all your links in the description, and so
Okay.
I can find you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Solution Finders. Please like, subscribe, and share so we can inform and inspire more people. If you would like to donate to the podcast, the link is in the description below. All donations go towards paying for software, video editing, and production work. Please visit unamarz.com, unamarz.com, for one-to-one sessions with me to reprogram your subconscious mind, for my original origami art and printed products like t-shirts and stationery, for more info about this podcast. If you've made it till this point, please add your favorite emoji in the comments. Have a wonderful day.